The 7,873rd meeting of the Security Council is now called to order. Provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Somalia. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Somalia to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome His Excellency Mr. Abdusalam Hadliye Omer, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Investment Promotion of the Federal Republic of Somalia. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Michael Keating, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Somalia and Head of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Somalia. Mr. Francisco Gaetano José Madeira, Special Representative of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission for Somalia and Head of the African Union Mission in Somalia. And Ms. Asha Gele Diri, Founder and Executive Director of the Asha Gele Foundation. It is so decided. Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. And I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2017/21, the report of the Secretary General on Somalia. And I now give the floor to Mr. Michael Keating.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We meet at an auspicious moment at the conclusion of an extended and exhaustive parliamentary electoral process and just 12 days before the election of a new president. We also meet when Al-Shabaab is doing everything it can to discredit and disrupt the process, as we're seeing in Mogadishu and in the attack in Kulbio today. Allow me to extend my deepest condolences to the families of the soldiers and civilians whose lives have been lost. An immediate priority is to ensure that the date set by the Joint Federal Election Committee for the presidential vote is adhered to. The date has been set on technical grounds, and pressures to change the date on political grounds should be resisted. It is also essential that the last stage of this process is conducted transparently, according to the rules that have been agreed and that have been designed to ensure a free and fair election. All candidates must honor the provisions of the Code of Conduct they signed when registering their candidacy. This is particularly important because the parliamentary stage of the process was marred by several instances of malpractice, including bribery and vote buying, harassment and intimidation, manipulation, as well as repeated and protracted delays. Some were high profile and egregious, though the majority of contests were correctly conducted. They were widely watched, including through social media. The electoral process, Mr. President, has held up a mirror to Somalis in which they have seen the good and the bad regarding how power is exercised, the relationship between elders, clan power brokers, politicians, business, ordinary citizens, women, and men. They do not like everything they have seen, least of all the levels of corruption and the absence of institutions that can ensure impartial and legal and financial accountability. Many important lessons have been learned. The ad hoc electoral bodies have done a remarkable job, but have had difficulties withstanding political pressures, threats, and inducements. The electoral timetable was subject to repeated delays, often because the process was used to try and resolve very long-standing disputes between clans, states, and other actors. The point is that the process was essentially a political one, used for inter- and intra-clan negotiations and reconciliation, and should be in part evaluated as such. The electoral features were essential as they set the stage for the move to universal suffrage. These lessons must be addressed in planning one-person, one-vote elections scheduled for 2020. The National Independent Electoral Commission needs to be empowered, a voter registry established, a robust legal mechanism put in place to adjudicate disputes and sanction abusive behavior. Efforts in this regard must begin as soon as the electoral process concludes. Despite the problems it has faced, the process has had very encouraging outcomes and does mark an important milestone in Somalia's evolution and post-conflict transformation. An upper house has come into existence, its 54 members chosen on a federal state rather than clan basis. This embodiment of the emerging federal character of Somalia could play a central role in advancing a genuinely national agenda. The number of voters has significantly increased. The electorate was expanded from 135 males in 2012 to over 13,000 individuals, 30% of whom were female. Almost a quarter of the MPs are now female, a truly remarkable achievement, the result of effective political mobilization supported by the UN and the international community and some Somali leaders. There has been genuine electoral competition. Voting took place in 6 locations around the country, again reflecting emerging federal state structures. The new parliament is younger, more diverse, and likely to be more responsive to the electorate than the previous one. In short, this parliament is more legitimate and representative than any since the last elections were held in 1969. And despite the horrendous attack by Al-Shabaab on a hotel used by parliamentarians in Mogadishu only 2 days ago, terrorists have been unable to derail the electoral process. This, in and of itself, is an important message. Mogadishu will remain an unusually target-rich environment until the presidential election is concluded, another reason why the schedule should not be allowed to slip. Let me pay tribute here also to AMISOM and to Somali security and intelligence forces for protecting electoral sites around the country. They deserve great credit for fulfilling a dangerous job in very difficult circumstances. The election of a president accepted as legitimate by the population and by the international community will set the stage for Somalia to tackle the serious challenges ahead. However, if voting for the next president is not secret or seen as compromised by corruption, coercion, or external interference, then the country could face a protracted period of uncertainty. This is the last thing Somalia needs. Somalis expect and deserve an administration that will address a number of urgent priorities. Many of these are on the agenda of the presidential candidates, including the incumbent. Let me name 4: reform of the security sector, acceleration of the constitutional review, reconciliation and resolution of many festering conflicts around the country, and strengthening governance, both at the center and locally, both to generate revenues and to provide services. Unfortunately, Mr. President, there's also a 5th, urgent priority, responding to the current drought. 5 million people are estimated to be in need around the country, from Somaliland and Puntland in the north to coastal areas in the center and Jubaland in the south. An estimated 320,000 under 5-year-olds are acutely malnourished. Coping capacities have been eroded to the point of collapse. The drought response plan seeks $864 million, $300 million of which is required in the first quarter of this year. The Famine Early Warning System Network reports that famine is now looming, that urgent action to ramp up assistance and ensure access is needed to mitigate the potential for large-scale loss of life. The drought has also serious political and security implications. It is exacerbating competition for resources such as water and intensifying local conflicts. The number of displaced people is visibly growing. Reports and images of malnutrition are circulating in social media. The perceived inability of the federal and local governments to respond will damage their legitimacy and will be exploited by Al-Shabaab. The drought is being cited by Somaliland as a key factor in postponing its elections from March until October. Revenues from the livestock trade are dropping, and financial resources committed to drought response will impact public and security sector payroll commitments. In a nutshell, failure to support the drought response could halt and even undermine the pursuit of key state-building and peace-building objectives. Mr. President, Security sector reform must not be delayed or derailed. The prospects for peace and stability depend upon Somalis assuming greater political and financial responsibility for their own security. A plan for achieving this is urgently required. AMISOM and the troop-contributing countries, as they have made clear, will not stay forever. Their presence has been and remains indispensable to securing Somalia, to creating the space for this federal state-building project, and to protecting the elections. They will not stay unless the immediate funding issues are addressed, and unless they believe that there is a credible plan whereby Somali security forces and police are able to hold areas that have been liberated from al-Shabaab. The 20% cut in the EU's generous support for the AU in Somalia is a source of great concern. AMISOM funding needs to be put on a sustainable and predictable basis. I urge the Council to review the options for doing this, including the use of assessed contributions. The SRCC will no doubt address you on these matters, including the need for immediate support for the planned offensive against al-Shabaab. But even as the financial problem is addressed, the larger issue of sustainable security in Somalia remains, given additional urgency by the stated intent of several troop-contributing countries to leave. Key to this will be building Somali national security forces, whether army, police, maritime, or intelligence, that reflect the emerging federal state, that are trusted by all Somalis and not seen as monopolized by certain clans, that are accountable to the political leadership and are affordable. Years of investment, Mr. President, by the international community have yielded limited results. Al-Shabaab is degraded, but remains a potent threat. One reason is that the approach to security has in the past been largely military and operational. This, of course, is essential, but not enough. The imperative for the incoming president and government is to reach a political agreement among Somalis regarding the architecture, ownership, funding, and purpose of the security forces as the basis for more coherent and coordinated international support by the international community, notably the African Union, the UN, and its partners. I hope the elements of this can be put in place by the time of the next high-level conference on Somalia, scheduled to take place in London in May. The African Union and the United Nations are committed to working closely together and with major investors and the broader international community and the new Somali administration on a comprehensive approach to security. This needs to draw upon the respective capacities and strengths of the key stakeholders, whether in funding and supporting AMISOM, building Somali national security forces, establishing and extending the rule of law and state authority at the local level, and in preventing and countering violent extremism. Sustainable security and Somalia's sovereignty require reduction of the country's heavy financial dependence upon the outside world and success in raising domestic revenues for the provision of public goods, including rule of law and security. The international financial institutions have a critical role to strengthen financial management capacities and accountability mechanisms. Another priority is the resumption of the constitutional review process to address critical outstanding political issues. These include delineation of responsibilities between the President and the Prime Minister, between the Upper House and the House of the People, and the respective roles and responsibilities of the federal government and federal member states in a range of areas, including resource and revenue sharing, the judicial system, and the roadmap towards one-person, one-vote elections. The agreement reached between the federal government and member states on policing is a good precedent. It now needs to be implemented. The constitutional review process, Mr. President, is all the more meaningful now that the federal map of Somalia is complete with the creation of Hirshabelle in November. The electoral process has put into sharp relief the many unresolved disputes and conflicts around the country. The most high profile are between Somaliland and Somalia and the dispute in Galkayo, but there are at least half a dozen others, any one of which has the potential to turn violent at great human and political cost. My Somali interlocutors have made it clear that they want the UN, working with its AU, EU and IGAD partners, to focus on building Somali capacities to prevent and resolve conflicts and to support reconciliation processes. Grounding this in the rule of law with a strong and constructive role by the new parliament could be one of the strongest guarantors of long-term stability and durable governance in Somalia. Ordinary Somalis must benefit from our collective efforts. Significant work remains to be done to improve the country's dismal human rights situation. I'm particularly concerned by the plight of children affected by armed conflict and the unacceptable incidents of abduction and forced recruitment by al-Shabaab. The majority of its militants consist of children deliberately targeted in communities and areas under al-Shabaab's control. I would like to add my voice to that of the Secretary-General Guterres, as he highlighted in his recent report on children in armed conflict, to speak out against this alarming situation. Mr. President, as requested by the Security Council, the UN family has started a review of its presence in Somalia with a view to support the next political cycle and in particular to address the priorities I have just outlined. I would like to mention that given the postponements of the electoral process, this review will obviously not be completed by the end of this month. However, we intend to engage with the new government as soon as possible and revert to you in the coming months. Allow me to conclude by thanking members of this Council for their unified position on Somalia and the support that I and my office are receiving from you. As I've said before, progress in Somalia is fragile and reversible and fraught with complexity. But the stage is gradually being set for Somalia to move to a new phase in sustaining peace, preventing and resolving violent conflict, and in building a functional federal state. Ultimately, it is the Somalis who will determine their own fate, but your support is central to their chances of success. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Keating for his briefing, and I now give the floor to Mr. Francisco Caetano José Madeira.
Your Excellencies, Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. On behalf of the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Madame Nkosazana Zuma, and that of Ambassador Ismail Shergi, Commissioner for Peace and Security, who was unable to make it here today because of the ongoing AU summit. I warmly greet you, Mr. President, and all members of the Security Council. Since my last briefing to Your Excellencies, there have been important and encouraging political and security developments in Somalia. Despite enormous and multiple challenges, Somalis have defied the odds and completed their parliamentary election. A new bicameral federal parliament is now in place in Somalia as a result of a highly disputed and engaging electoral process. The presidential election is scheduled to take place on 8 February as announced. The African Union and AMISOM, in close partnership with IGAD, the UN, and other international partners, stood by Somalia and provided the parliament, the government, the F8, C8, as well as the IADRM, the support, assistance, and advice it could, so that the electoral process is conducted in accordance with the approved terms of reference. Its credibility is enhanced by ensuring that allegations of malpractices and other irregularities are objectively, properly, and timely addressed, and the attempt by al-Shabaab to taint and discredit its final outcome does not succeed. The political environment is that of hope and confidence, as the newly inaugurated Speaker of the House of the People announced the priorities of the national political agenda as being the continuation and completion of the constitutional review, the formation of political parties, the establishment of local governments, the dialogue with the Somaliland, the strengthening of revenue collection capacity, the building of state institutions, and enhancement of their capacity to deliver basic and essential services to the people. As partners united in a common struggle against violent extremism and destabilization, we members of the international community, are called to support this parliament, not only in achieving these goals, but also in enhancing its role as the privileged forum for dialogue, political debate and negotiation, national reconciliation and cohesion, the rightful representative, the mouthpiece and the legitimate interpreter of the will, aspirations, and apprehensions of the people of Somalia in the coming 4 years. Despite being a result of an electoral process which fell far short of the cherished one person, one vote, the coming into existence of this parliament represents progress and displays unique characteristics. Apart from having passed a severe scrutiny by their own communities, the members of this parliament have won the trust of their people when they emerged victorious from an electoral competition in which the majority of 51 delegates for each candidate voted for each one of them. This feature was not there in 2012, where only a few elders had the right and power to determine alone who should represent their community and the people of Somalia. 15% of the new parliamentarians are youth aged between 25 and 35 years, and 24% of the parliament are women. These two social categories represent the majority of the Somali population today. They are the face of the most vibrant and most enduring feature of the Somali society. Many have been exposed to different political, social, and cultural environments, which is an asset in itself. This new reality, if properly harnessed, has the potential to help Somalia move faster away from its current predicament. Another important development in the period under consideration is the fact that, despite Al-Shabaab's vow to thwart the process, the parliamentary election took place in all the 6 designated electoral centers without any security incident that could be attributed to Al-Shabaab. This was possible because of the professionalism and close coordination and cooperation that existed between the Somali National Security Forces and AMISOM, the effectiveness of the plan they put in place, as well as the enhanced and sustained exchange of real-time actionable intelligence. This effort is continuing and is producing commendable results in other areas of joint endeavor. Mr. President, the gains accumulated with the successful launch of regional states can be compromised if the current political unease that is witnessed in a good number of these regional states is not properly tackled and timely addressed. The continued existence of such tensions has the potential to arouse the appetites of negative armed groups who normally prey on such convoluted environments and escalate violence to unexpected and challenging levels. Mr. President, AMISOM is working hand in hand with the Somali National Security Forces. It continues to provide a secure environment for the Somali political process to thrive. Though weakened, Al-Shabaab continues to engage in targeted assassinations, direct and indirect fire, ambushes reinforced with the improvised explosive devices on AMISOM convoys along supply routes, the hurling of grenades, vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, and infiltration across all sectors, including Mogadishu. Despite logistical, financial, and operational challenges, AMISOM continues to support the Somali National Security Forces operations, the administration, and training in the areas of responsibility. On the other hand, AMISOM police units are continuing to carry out their mandated tasks in Mogadishu, Baidoa, Kismayo, Beledweyne, Johar, and Adado. These activities are taking place with immense sacrifice by the troop and police contributing countries, and in the context of inadequate and very limited resources. Mr. President, the reality in the theater of operations has changed. The enemy is resorting to new tactics which are posing new challenges. The need to adjust to these new challenges and overcome the enemy is pressing. The terrorist group continues to maintain control of pockets of territories around the Juba Valley corridor and along the northeastern coastline. Their stronghold in these areas has been reinforced by the growing influence and influx of foreign fighters, mostly through the neighboring Yemen. These territories need to be recovered from the enemy as an integral part of the process for its degradation and eventual defeat. To do this, the African Union reiterates its call for the deployment of additional forces, key combat and stabilization capabilities in order to enable AMISOM and the Somali National Security Forces conduct expanded offensive operations. There is urgency for the UN and other members of the international community to provide a one-time support to additional forces of up to 4,000 troops in the form of provision of rations, fuel, transport, and medicine for a limited duration to allow for the conduct of specific military operations as a catalyst for AMISOM imminent drawdown from Somalia. It has become abundantly clear to us, Mr. President, that no matter how effective AMISOM may be, there can be no lasting and sustainable peace and security in Somalia unless capable and properly empowered Somali National Security Forces are in place. We therefore appeal that support continues to be provided to Somali National Security Forces, not only for the upcoming offensive operations, but also in the context of the overall effort of building a comprehensive and capable Somali security apparatus. To this effect, we insist on the need for a better coordinated, complementary, and mutually reinforcing partner intervention in the area of security in Somalia. Our individual and dispersed interventions, much as they are accepted and appreciated, are having limited effect in our joint security effort in the country. We will continue to join hands with the UN in our effort to work closely with our partners in this endeavor. Even so, a comprehensive approach to security is indispensable. This should be anchored on the concurrence of mutually reinforcing factors, such as presence and adequate territorial expansion of functioning state institutions, democratic governance, provision of humanitarian assistance and other essential services to the people, dispute resolution mechanisms, building capable national security forces, preventing and addressing the conditions conducive to violent extremism and radicalization that lead to terrorism are the best way of guaranteeing sustainable peace and security to Somalia. We recognize that partners like the UK and others are doing a very commendable job in this regard. We look forward to continuing working with them in this field. We, Mr. President, are happy that a suitable solution was found for the payment of stipends to the Burundian contingent serving in AMISOM. But this problem is a reflection of the limited resources and the limited funding that AMISOM is facing. A solution, a sustainable, lasting, and acceptable solution must be found to ensure that AMISOM is properly funded, because we are fighting with our bare hands against an enemy that has acquired expertise to produce explosive devices that are so powerful that can bring down this building. Mr. Chairman, the possibilities of considering that the assessed contribution is taken into account for the funding of AMISOM become now very important. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Madeira for his briefing, and I now give the floor to Ms. Asha Gale Diri.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, SRRG Michael Keating, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Somali Federal Government, and colleagues, all protocol observed. It is an honor for me to speak before this esteemed Council on the state of women's political representation in Somalia. For the limited time I have, I cannot go through all the key milestones in the 2016 electoral process of achievements, challenges, and lessons learned, and it's just distributed around. Mr. President, the Committee of Goodwill Ambassadors, which I have the privilege of chairing, was appointed by the Federal President of Somalia to help women secure 30% of the seats in both houses of parliament. That was the goal agreed by the country's political leaders in the National Leadership Forum. As in other countries, advancing women's political empowerment in Somalia is a challenging task, despite the huge contributions they make to the society. Women are often excluded from decision-making and leadership roles. In 2012, women were selected for only 14% of the states in the federal parliament. The National Leadership Forum's decision for the 2016 electoral process to reserve a minimum 30% of the parliamentary seats for women was therefore very encouraging. Mr. President, to achieve this objective, the Goodwill Ambassadors first carried out a clan mapping exercise showing the distribution of reserved seats per clan. The detailed mapping is attached also my notes just distributed around. We then launched an advocacy campaign involving civil society actors, political lobbyists, as well as the federal and state women's affairs ministries to secure the buy-in of political leaders and clan elders. We received numerous support and encouragement from the UN and the international community at large in our quest to realize the 30% goal, and I would like to thank largely to the partnership and collective efforts of Somali Federal Government, National Leadership Forum, Women's Affairs Ministries, civil society, women activists, UN Awesome Gender Office, UNDP, UN Women, EU, IGAD, AMISOM, members of the diplomatic community. Women were elected to 25% of the seats in both houses of the new parliament, and my fellow Goodwill Ambassadors. It's substantial and unprecedented achievement for Somali women and for the society as a whole. Mr. President, in the course of our work, we faced numerous challenges and learned important lessons. Allow me to present a few of those lessons which should be considered in preparation for the 2020 universal elections. In the absence of legally binding provision, the political decision to reserve 30% of the seats for women was extremely difficult to enforce. No one was or could be held responsible and accountable for their action and inaction. A secured legal provision is therefore critical to advancing women's political equality. Security the reserved seats for women relied in a large measure on the will of clan elders, who are traditionally opposed to women's political participation. This affected women's ability to secure clan endorsement and to operate freely without threats and intimidation. A massive structural transformation is required to advance women's representation in politics and the democratization process in Somalia. Throughout the electoral process, women presented a unified position which served as a source of strength. The goodwill ambassadors, civil society, women's affairs ministries, we all worked in a united fashion, which had a very positive impact in our campaign. Lack of adequate financial and logistical support posed a significant challenge to women candidates during the campaign period. In addition, women were disproportionately affected by election-related corruption and abuses, which weakened their position vice versa the clan elders. The state-level electoral implementation teams and the state authorities provision for adequate support and the creation of level playing field will be critical to the success of women's candidates in the future. Mr. President, on behalf of the goodwill ambassadors, I would like to thank Government of Sweden, currently chair of the council, and UN Women who facilitated my trip to New York. I thank you, Mr. President, and members of all the council, your kind attention. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Ashagele for her briefing. And now the representative of Uruguay has asked for the floor to make a statement.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude for the detailed presentations made by Mr. Keating and Mr. Madeira, and also by Ms. Ashagele. And at the same time, I'd like to welcome the presence in the room of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Somalia, Dr. Abdusalam Omar. Sir, allow me to begin my statement by vigorously condemning the suicide attack which took place on Wednesday in Mogadishu against the Daya Hotel, an attack perpetrated by the Al-Shabaab terrorist group that led to dozens of deaths. Sir, at the beginning of a new stage in Somalia, Uruguay welcomes the establishment of the new federal parliament last December, the election of the presidents of their respective chambers, and we hope that the process will conclude successfully on the 8th of February with the election of the new president. Uruguay urges that all the necessary measures be taken to ensure a review of the provisional federal constitution, considering it vital for Somalia to become a true constitutional democracy. The support of UNSUM and the financial assistance from the international community are vital for the swift adoption of the permanent constitution. Uruguay acknowledges the effort made in order to obtain 30% of the seats for women, although in this case the goal was not achieved. The result still has shown that there is a transformation in the representation and political participation of women in Somalia. With this important precedent, we should bolster our efforts to achieve the goal in 2020, as well as to effectively implement the democratic principle of one person, one vote. It's crucial to reform the security sector, in particular the swift and effective development of the National Somali Army, so that the security forces of the government, including the police, could assume greater responsibility in the maintenance of peace and security and in protecting Somali citizens. Mr. President, Uruguay expresses great concern over the reported increase in human rights violations in Somalia. Notwithstanding the important commitments that have been made by Somali authorities in recent years to protect children, the detention of children is still a motive of concern. Their detention because of a supposed link with Al-Shabaab. We're also concerned by the killings and violations to the rights, such as recruitment by different parties, sexual violence, abductions, attacks against schools and hospitals. Uruguay urges the government of Somalia to treat children primarily as victims and their priorities should be the greater interest of the child as well as international protection standards. Death sentences imposed on children in Puntland are unacceptable. Allow me also to point out that as a co-drafter of a resolution 2286 of the Security Council, we observe with concern that in the last report of the Secretary General on children in armed conflict in Somalia, the report points out that between 2012 and 2016, there were 40 attacks against hospitals in that country. And these attacks are war crimes wherever they come from. Sir, to conclude, Uruguay acknowledges once again the important work done by UNSOS, UNSOM, and AMISOM. We consider that they are vital to achieve the construction of the Somali state, as well as progress in peace building and in lasting stability in the Horn of Africa. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I thank the representative of Uruguay for his statement.
I'll make a very brief intervention in my capacity as representative of Sweden, just to thank the briefers and a few remarks to especially honor the presence of the representative of Somalia, the foreign minister, and also the representative of civil society, Ms. Asha Gele. I wanted first to express our condolences to the governments of Somalia and Kenya and to the victims' families for the deplorable attacks over the last few days, the terror attacks. Sweden welcomes the successful electoral process, and we compliment the Somalia Security Forces and AMISOM for having provided a secure environment in which the process could take place. The new parliament is inclusive. 25% of parliamentarians are women, 16% are under 35 years old, and renewed, with half of its members elected for the first time. Important now that there are no further delays and that the presidential election is held on 8th of February as scheduled, so a government can be formed to take peace and state-building efforts forward. Building a better future for Somalia should benefit from the input of all Somalis, and the presence here today of Ms. Asha Gele is a testimony to a vibrant civil society. We hope that increased representation of women and youth now seen in Parliament will be replicated at every level in the peace and state-building effort. I want to congratulate you, Ms. Asha Gele, on your leadership in Somalia. I think you're breaking new ground in a way that could also serve as a model for other countries beyond Somalia. But the report today also highlights a severe humanitarian situation, which is likely to worsen. 5 million people are already suffering from acute food shortages. And I just want to call here in this open chamber on all donors to seek in their pockets to provide funds and assistance towards the humanitarian response plan, and also call on Somali authorities to facilitate humanitarian access in order to prevent a humanitarian disaster. Finally, on AMISOM, we believe it remains of crucial importance for the stabilization of Somalia. We commend the trip contributor countries and their soldiers and pay tribute to the efforts and sacrifice. Sweden and the European Union are and remain committed to supporting AMISOM both financially and politically. But funding gaps must be dealt with, and we join the African Union in calling on the international community at large to assist, while recognizing the need to find more sustainable means. However, achieving sustainable peace and stabilization goes beyond AMISOM, and the development of a credible and capable Somali national security sector must be a priority within a well-coordinated, comprehensive approach to security. I resume now my function as President of the Council, and I have the pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Abdusalam Hadli Omar, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to also join you and Michael Keating and Ambassador Madeira for sending our sincere condolence to the families, Kenyan families and Somali families, and the military and the civilians who have perished last night in Juba Valley. This is a senseless attack that makes no sense. It's primitive, it's un-Islamic, and it's a wrong way of using our children as human bombs. And this has happened too often. So let's all condemn it, and let's all make sure that it doesn't happen again. At the outset, on behalf of the Somali government, Mr. President, I wish to congratulate the new members of this body for their election, and in particular, the stewardship of the Swedish government and your leadership this month. It's a great honor for me to be addressing the UN Security Council on the important matters of Somalia's progress and the remaining challenges today. The UN security members, alongside many other partner nations within the UN, have and continue to play a vital role in our national progress alongside our people and government, both multilaterally and bilaterally. From the beginning, it's important to remember that since I last addressed the Security Council in September 2016, all members have taken the opportunity to visit Somalia and witness our national progress. The members of the Security Council met with the President in Mogadishu. This was accompanied by a further high-level visits from many Security Council and UN member states, which serve as the best evidence of constructive engagement, strengthening partnership, and Somalia and Somalis determinedly overcoming the difficult nightmare of the past. I must stress and reiterate that in many ways, Somalia does have some key remaining challenges to overcome going forward. As His Excellency Michael Keating, the United Nations representative in Somalia, made it clear in his presentation. But he also acknowledged the overall progress our country is making, and it's tangible, sustainable, and historic. The progress I'm referring to and will discuss in greater detail are political, social, economic, and security. In Somalia's case, and that of the most post-conflict states, these must go hand in hand for there to be a sustainable development. Furthermore, while the term progress can be easily open to interpretation according to individual and the group expectations, we can safely say that all measurements that progress in Somalia is clear and self-evident. Somalia cannot hide from or wish away their difficult past, as it clearly have impacted on us all heavily, but there is no denying our collective ambition to never return to it. The federal government of Somalia and the Somali people, through sacrifice, self-assessment, tough negotiations, have finally set sail for the direction of peace and progress. Somalia is among the first democracy, and we are once again among Africa's first democracy, and we are once again in the process of completing our successful national elections in decades. So far, all parliamentarians, both the upper house and the lower house, have been elected by constituents they represent. They in turn elected speakers for both institutions and paved the way for presidential election scheduled February 8, 2017. For the first time in history, a transformation had taken place for female political representation, as has been underlined by my sister Asha Gele. And participation in Somalia, and important precedents have been set for the political mobilization of women. We are proud to say that we have almost 26% women representation in our parliament, an increase over 70%, which is substantial improvement from the 2012. In addition to the increase in female lawmakers, a large number of young and talented MPs have been elected, including those from diaspora. While the election was not yet one person, one vote, it's a remarkable improvement on 2012 when 135 elders selected the entire parliament. The current process of indirect election allowed a total of 14,025 delegates selected by traditional elders and representing all groups within society to vote for competing candidates. More impressively, the voting was not Mogadishu Center like in 2012, but took place all over the newly formed regional member states, including Hirshabelle, which was finally established. Following on from the votes, which is what's most symbolic, is how peaceful and quickly the titles were transferred and how the Somali people and politicians have embraced the spirit and the rules of democracy. Where in 2012, the entire process of election was in the hands of 135 tribal elders, guided by Electoral Commission, today it's overtaken by a federal indirect electoral implementation team at the national level and 6 regional state indirect electoral implementation team in the regions who have been vocal throughout the election. Despite the mentioned successes in the electoral process, there were challenges too, which will provide us with many valuable lessons for the future. These challenges which stem from the very ambition of holding elections in recovering both conflict states with an internationally recognized government only from 2012 led to delay in the electoral process, which will be concluded by February 8, 2017. Among the key reasons for the delay was the process of understanding, implementing electoral system that was adopted by the Somali government on the part of the federal member states and candidates. Going forward, the process of planning and executing one person, one vote in 2020 must begin immediately. Furthermore, to guide this entire process, we will partner with all stakeholders and complete the constitutional review process, strengthen enabling democratic institutions, ratify and implement the law that underpins it all, such as the political party laws. It's a fact of history and process that democratization is not easy. It's a marathon in a tough terrain, rather a race in perfectly designed stadium with a guiding tracks, perfect lighting, enthusiastic fans. However, we in Somalia are committed to our national development and hence governing ourselves fairly and democratically. Since our last meeting at the Security Council, security has continued to improve. As I informed you then, I can confidently repeat that Al-Shabaab, with the courage of the sacrifices of the Somali National Army and AMISOM troops, have been militarily defeated. Despite the headlines and sometimes irresponsible discussion in the international media for resurgence, Al-Shabaab have been reduced to carrying out primarily an opportunistic attacks against soft targets and innocent civilians. The most recent of this attack was on Wednesday on the Daya Hotel in Mogadishu, in which innocent people lost their lives and many were injured because of a pointless and a cruel violence. While our thoughts and prayers are with all the victims of this and other evil attacks in Somalia and across the world, we are winning the war. Many of their leaders have either been killed or defected to the government, and their desperate tactics is the best evidence of their diminishing capabilities and moral bankruptcy. Permanently defeating Al-Shabaab is a pretext to Somalia's progress and the overall fight against international terrorism. No one is insulated from terrorism, and the violent ending of last year, as well as the beginning of this year, as in the diverse places as Berlin, Istanbul, and Mogadishu, is clear illustration of this. We therefore are proud and privileged to be working with valued partners, including members of the Security Council, in a diverse, effective way to destroy the last remaining buckets of terror in our soil. The Somali government are proud of the collective effort of the Somali security forces, their partners in AMISOM, which allows them to live peacefully. I pay my respect and convey our national gratitude for their sterling efforts and success, which has come to a deadly price on many occasions. Their sacrifices will never be forgotten. Their memories will spur on our national and regional progress. Despite the courage of AMISOM soldiers in Somalia, our national ambition is to nurture and develop a well-trained, equipped, and funded Somali National Army and a police force, protecting its citizens and safeguarding the progress of the nation for the betterment of our people, neighbors, and the world. We are thankful to all partners who have actively assisted us to work toward the realization of this fundamental goal. The fight against international terrorism is difficult and long. This is simple because we are dealing with a phenomena which include greater use of technology to radicalize people and new techniques of terror, such as misleading young children blowing themselves up. And if you want to know the last incident in Mogadishu, the two young people who blew themselves up were 16 years old. There's no textbook that teaches us to deal with this, and thus we must share knowledge, adapt, and devise sustainable and diverse solutions to overcome this evil. In the case of Somalia, we have completed our national counter-violent terrorism strategy, and we look forward to continuing the partnership with all UN member states on this critical issue. Mr. President, despite our solid and political, socio-economic ambitions and gains, I would like to reiterate, as I did in September 2016 presentation at this body, the importance of the remaining challenges to development in Somalia, such as investment, education, jobs, and skills. These critical components of development must accompany the physical security we seek. Otherwise, it will prove difficult to overcome the challenges of radicalization, illegal migration, and the tragedy of wasted talents and lives in the high seas. The Somali government has adopted a national development plan which was completed last year and in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. We kindly ask all partners to support the clearly specified Somali priorities contained within this. Mr. President, I would like to turn your attention to the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Somalia, which is poised to worsen as the drought conditions extend beyond Puntland, Somaliland, to the areas of the south. The drought is expected to deepen as the current rainy season sharply underperformed, and it's going to take another 4 months before the next rainy season. According to the United Nations, as have been stated, there are now 5 million people who are facing acute food shortage, including more than 50,000 children who are severely malnourished. We appeal to this body, donor community, public and private sector to urgently heed the multiple urgent warning by the United Nations specialized agencies and help us address pressing urgent life-saving and livelihood support needs, facing many Somalis, in particular women, children, and internally displaced other vulnerable groups. And this appeal might go for the whole Horn of Africa region, parts of Ethiopia and Kenya. To conclude, this is my third opportunity to address this important body in my current role. Our government has achieved many of the goals we set for ourselves in the past 2 years, but many challenges remain. It has been an honor to work with your governments on the key issues concerning both Somalia and the wider world, and I would like to thank you all for your valuable support. I would like to also stress upon you the fact that Somalia's progress is more than rhetoric. It's a reality evidenced by every diaspora, including myself, to return the undefeatable spirit of the Somali people and to achieve progress and prosperity for themselves and their families and nation. So in viewing Somalia, please continue to see our courageous progress against great odds, our country's wonderful opportunity, untapped potential resources, as well as our determination to never return to the past, but accelerate peaceful, purposeful, to a better future. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Hadliye Omer for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on this subject. The meeting is adjourned.